Okay, so this week's Parsha is Parshas Beha'aloscha. Starts on page 775 in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash. Uh, so the Parsha begins. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to Aaron and say to him, when you kindle the lamps towards the face of the menorah, shall the seven lamps cast light." That means that they should all be pointed towards the middle. So you have that middle stem, and all the lights are pointed towards the middle, which is usually the opposite of how you want to light a room. That when you light a room, you want the light to be spread throughout the room. And we're on page 775. Right. So usually when you light a room, you try to spread the lights out and focus them in different areas so the entire room is lit up is lit. Whereas here with the menorah, we're saying that all the lights were bent towards the middle, we're pointing towards the middle, so it's almost like a spotlight where it's all focused in one direction, which is not very useful for lighting a room. And that's where I say to say that do we need that Hashem doesn't need our light, that Hashem provided us light throughout the time in the throughout all our time in the desert. So He doesn't need our light, and it's just we're lighting. It's doing some spiritual, we're fulfilling the mitzvah, and it's accomplishing spiritually. But it's not because God needs us to light to turn on the lights for Him. Okay, the commentaries is actually the Medrash comments here that we ended off last week's parsha with the gifts that the Nisim, that the leaders of the tribes gave to the inauguration of the tabernacle. Now we go straight to the menorah. That Aaron had the mitzvah to light the menorah. So the commentators ask, like, what's the connection? What's the flow in the Torah? And they answer that when Aaron saw that all the Nisim, all the leaders of the tribes were inspired, they all had this idea to give a gift to give a gift as a representative as a leader of their tribe towards the building of the Mishkan, towards the building of the tabernacle. And they all did this, but Aaron did not, and the tribe of Levi was not represented. And because they weren't, their leadership wasn't inspired, they didn't have this idea. So Aaron felt bad about that. He felt like, why are we missing out on that? On this privilege of donating towards the Chanukah Hamizbeach, towards the inauguration of the altar. So Hashem told him, and that's where this flows right into this parsha. Hashem told him that what you have is better than what they have because you light the candles. You're going to light the menorah. And the commentaries asked, the Ramban asked that why is that better? I mean, why is that what's chosen? That he lights the menorah. What's that? Instead of giving the gifts that the leadership gave towards the inaugurating the altar, like they gave the first offerings to start the offerings on the altar. So why is the menorah what's picked? Aaron did all this service in the temple. Could have said very well that he was going to sprinkle the blood of the offerings. He was going to bring the incense. He was going to do the service on Yom Kippur. The Kohanim did all of the service in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle. Why is this specifically the menorah was chosen? And there's a medrash that actually implies that even though what they did was only temporary, even all the offerings are only temporary. It's only as long as we have the Beis Mikdash, as long as we have the temple, but the menorah will never cease. So the Ramban understands that it's not actually referring to the menorah in the temple, in the tabernacle or the temple, but this is actually a hint in the Torah, or the Medrash actually was hinting towards the menorah of Hanukkah, which came about from a war during the Second Temple time. So hundreds of years later, that over 1,000 years later. During the when the Jews fought the Greeks, and we ended up with. It's interesting. Rabbi Slatus actually spoke about that today at the bris. He mentioned it briefly, but when we fought against the Greeks and the Maccabees won, the Maccabees, not the ones here, but the Maccabees who fought against the Greeks were Kohanim. They were Kohanim, which means that they were descendants of Aaron. So he's saying that what your descendants will bring about, the Kohanim will bring about this great miracle of Hanukkah. and they'll end up lighting, and they'll which will lead to lighting of the menorah, not just during the time of the tabernacle and the temple, but throughout all generations. Even to this day, we're lighting the menorah every year on Hanukkah, which is a result of the miracle brought about by these Chashmonayim, by the Maccabees, who were descendants of Aaron, who were Kohanim. And I think it's the Ramban. It might have been the Kli Yakar who points out. Yeah.
Fought with or under the Maccabees?
Not necessarily. Not all of them were Kohanim, but the leadership, were that family, which was a family of Kohanim, who actually afterwards after those battles, they became the kings and had a dynasty which was criticized by the sages because the Kohanim their role wasn't to be kings. Their role was to do the service, and the role of Yehuda was to be king. So they were actually criticized following that. Where was I going with this? Oh yeah. So I saw it also pointed out that immediately before the gifts of the Nisim of the leadership of the tribes towards the inauguration of the tabernacle and the inauguration of the altar, so it also had a service of the Kohanim, and that was Birkas Kohanim, the blessing of the Kohanim. Yivarecha Hashem Yishmerecha, which is the only Kohan service specific to the Kohanim that was still done today. All other service of the Kohanim is dependent on the Beis HaMikdash. Then that's the only one that we still do today is the blessing that the Kohanim give the congregation. So he's saying that it's the inauguration of the tabernacle, which was done by the other tribes, is kind of bracketed, is surrounded by these two services that are one, the Birkas Kohanim, which is done by the Kohanim, and the lighting of the menorah, which was brought about by the Kohanim, that is still in practice throughout all generations, even after we don't no longer have the temple to do the service, but that's still around even to this day. Okay, then it describes a little bit briefly how the menorah was made. Then in verse 5, it talks about the consecration of the Levites, how the Levites are initiated into being the sanctified ones who will do not the service of the Kohanim, but the other service in the temple. They would be the ones to carry the tabernacle through the desert whenever they're moving, and they would be the ones to sing during the service, during the tabernacle and temple service, and they would be the ones to open the gates, and they would pretty much be the one running the temple while the Kohanim are doing the service. So this is how you're to inaugurate them. In verse 7, so shall you do to them to purify them, sprinkle upon them water of purification, let them pass a razor over their entire flesh. They were shaved all over their body, their head and their body. Let them immerse their garments in the mikvah, and they shall become pure. And then they bring an offering. And in verse 9, you shall bring the Levites before the tent of meeting. You shall gather together an entire assembly of the children of Israel. On page 777, verse 10, you shall bring the Levites before Hashem, and the children of Israel shall lean their hands upon the Levites. That all the people came to accept them as the religious leadership. And Aaron shall wave the Levites as a wave service before Hashem from the children of Israel, and they shall remain to perform the service of Hashem. That means that Aaron would wave every Levi, which means that almost like a lulav, that he would pick up every single Levi, and we said there were like 20-something thousand of them, and he would pick them up forwards, right, left, forwards, right, back, left, up and down, and wave them in every direction. And I said, yes, and I say this was miraculous. Okay. Yeah, and the commentaries say, I don't know. They say that it's miraculous, but sometimes I feel like on Hanukkah when I'm giving each one of my kids a shoulder ride, it feels like I waved 20,000 of them. Okay. What's that? Especially my oldest, who's now getting to be about my size. But okay. Okay, and the commentaries say that this waving, the picking them up, is similar to a Maisa Kinyan, for those who study Daf Yomi. It's an act of acquiring that in order to transfer ownership in halacha, in Jewish law, you need to perform an act to acquire something. So like with land, a lot of times just the transfer of money would affect the transfer of ownership, or a contract changing hands would transfer ownership. But with movable objects, like let's say an animal or anything that's not land, pretty much, you would actually pick it up or move it in order to transfer ownership. So this picking up of the Levium was almost transferring ownership, that they're now under they're under the umbrella of the divine service. They're like owned by the divine service. Okay. So moving on, they did everything that they were commanded. And in verse 23, at the bottom of page 777, Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "This shall apply to the Levites. From 25 years of age and up, you shall join the legion of the service of the tent of meeting. From 50 years of age, you shall withdraw from the legion of work and no longer work. He shall minister with his brethren in the tent of meeting to safeguard the charge, but work he shall not perform." What does that mean? That he shall not work, but he shall withdraw from the legion of work and no longer work, but he shall minister with his brethren in the tent of meeting to safeguard the charge, but he shall not work. What does that mean? So the commentaries say what that means is that once they're 50, they're retired from doing the heavy lifting, really, from carrying the tabernacle and the components of the tabernacle in the desert, but they would still be able to sing as part of the service in the tabernacle, and they would be able to be the ones to open the gates of the tabernacle. But that they could still do even after they reached retirement age of 50. And the commentators also comment that it says here in verse 23, from 25 years of age and up he shall join the legion, whereas when they counted them earlier, it said from 30 years of age they do the service. So our sages understand that there's a kind of apprenticeship period, where from the age of 25 to 30, they're studying the service and learning how to do it. And it's from 30, so that's the almost apprenticeship period. And then from 30 and up, they're part of the regular service.
It says here Ramban
Yeah.
maintains that 50-year-olds couldn't sing anymore either.
Yeah. There's a disagreement. I was quoting Rashi.
Okay.
Yeah. Where are we? I'm saying you guys well, right? There's a disagreement there. Okay, so next on page 779, chapter 9. Hashem spoke to Moshe in the wilderness of Sinai in the second year from their exodus from the land of Egypt in the first month, saying, "The children of Israel shall make the Pesach offering at an appointed time." So right away, the commentaries point out that if you look at the dates here, it seems to be a little confused. That it says here in the second year from their exodus from the land of Egypt in the first month. That's the month of Nisan, the second year from when they last left Egypt. If you look at how the book of Bamidbar begins, where are we? I'm almost there.
27.
Thank you. Okay, 727. So if you look at the date, in verse 1, Hashem spoke to Moshe in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting on the first of the second month in the second year after the exodus from the land of Egypt, saying. So Bamidbar starts in the second month, that's the month of Iyar, and now we're back in time in Nisan. Now we're back to in the first month. So we're going backwards in time. And the commentaries say here, this is an example of what our sages say, that the Torah is not necessarily always in chronological order. And the Ramban explains that when we're describing when the Torah was teaching the construction of the tabernacle and the service of the Levium, so in Bamidbar it goes into how they were arranged in the camp, and that's the beginning of Bamidbar. That it goes into how that where the Mishkan, where the tabernacle was erected, where it stood in reference to where all the tribes were encamped. And now, once we finish that, so now we're going back to some more mitzvahs, And here we're talking about the Pesach that they did in the desert, which actually happened before that. So, and so the Torah is not necessarily always in chronological order. And here's the case that it's actually explicit in the Torah that we're going to back to an earlier time in chronology. So it says, then verse 2, the children of Israel shall make the Pesach offering in its appointed time. On the 14th day of this month in the afternoon shall you make it in its appointed time. According to all decrees and laws shall you make it. So here we have the mitzvah. This is the first time they're actually bringing the Pesach offering after they did the Pesach what's the word? After they did the Pesach offering in Egypt itself. Like when they were doing it in front of the Egyptians before they had left Egypt. So then they had some special mitzvahs involved where they would like paint the doorposts with the blood from the Paschal offering. This is the first time they have a regular Pesach offering. So that's what they're doing. So the Moshe told them, we have to do the Korban Pesach this year. And that's what they did. So in verse 6, there were men who had been contaminated by a human corpse and could not make the Pesach offering on that day. So they approached Moshe and Aaron on that day. Those men said to him, we are contaminated through a human corpse. Why shall we be diminished by not offering Hashem's offering in its appointed time among the children of Israel? Moshe said to them, stand and I'll hear what Hashem will command you. And in verse 9, on page 781, Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel, saying, if any man will become contaminated through a human corpse or a distant road, or on a distant road, meaning someone was far away and couldn't make it to the tabernacle or to the temple for Pesach, whether you or your generations, he shall make the Pesach offering for Hashem in the second month, on the 14th day in the afternoon shall they make it, with matzahs and bitter herbs shall they eat it. So they have a makeup day for the Paschal offering. If they were ineligible or too far away to do it the first on Pesach, they would do it 1 month later on the 14th of Iyar. And that's why it's a lot of times it's a surprise that there's no Tachanan. And like people are, why, what happened today? Why is there no Tachanan? It's Pesach Sheni. That this day that was the second chance for people who couldn't do the first Pesach, who couldn't bring the Paschal offering on Pesach, so they would bring it on the 14th of Iyar, and that's why we would not say Tachanan that day, because it's like a minor holiday. So anyway, the commentaries comment, the Medrash says that every mitzvah in the Torah doesn't necessarily give the context of how the mitzvah was commanded. It says Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying and gives the mitzvah. Speak to the children of Israel and do the following or don't do the following. Whereas here it discusses there was an incident that triggers it, that there are people who were impure through contact with the dead. Some say they were the ones who carried out Mishal and Elzaphan. They were the ones who carried out Nadav and Avihu, Aaron's sons, who had died and who buried them. And some say there was the people who were carrying the coffin of Yosef. So by carrying his coffin, so they were rendered impure. But whatever it is, these people were ineligible to bring the Paschal offering because they were impure. And they went to Moshe and said, why can't we want to do this mitzvah? And so our sages say that because of this great act that they're coming wanting to fulfill a mitzvah, Moshe Feinstein comments that they could have very easily said, oh, we got out of it this year. We can't do it. We're doing a different mitzvah, and that made us not eligible for this one. It's like, like what's the word? We're pater. We patered ourselves. We got out of it. But that wasn't their reaction. Their reaction wasn't, okay, we got out of it. Their reaction was, we want to do that mitzvah. And why they're saying we were doing another mitzvah. Why should that make us ineligible for another mitzvah? And because of this strong desire that they had to fulfill a mitzvah, even though they technically could have gotten out of it, so the Torah wants to write a whole parsha through them, that they're the trigger and they're the impetus for this mitzvah in the Torah. So what our sages say is the Hebrew megalgalin zechus al yedei zakai, that we bring about a merit through meritorious people. And that's something that they say in general when it comes to a question of fate and actions, is that maybe if one person does another person a favor and helps them out, maybe that person would have been successful anyway. They were fated to be. God wouldn't have allowed them to be successful if not for the fact they were supposed to be successful. But Hashem brings their success about through merit people who have a merit, through the kindness that Hashem allows us to people who have this merit of doing acts of kindness to bring that kindness about instead of just doing it himself. That's Magalgan's plus Zakai. Hashem brings about merit through meritorious individuals or groups. Okay, so we have this mitzvah of the second Pesach as well. So then it continues. An interesting passage, page 781, verse 14. When a convert shall dwell with you, and he shall make his Pesach offering to Hashem, according to the decree of the Pesach offering and its law, so shall he do. One decree shall be for you in the proselyte and the native of the land. That the Torah seems to be emphasizing that even a convert has to make a korban Pesach. And there's actually two statements in the Gemara. The one Gemara said that you might think that if a person converts to Judaism, they would bring a korban Pesach immediately. That would be like their first act of korban Pesach. And they explained that because when that was really our first act as a nation, our first mitzvah as a nation really was korban Pesach. Other than Rosh Chodesh, we had Rosh Chodesh, but that was the introduction to the Paschal offering, and that was a disavowal of the Egyptian culture. The Egyptians worshipped this at that time, and we were disavowing that by taking their deity. It was the month of Aries of the ram, and taking their deity and slaughtering it. And so that was an outright act of disavowal of the Egyptian religion and the Egyptian culture. So maybe every convert, someone converts to Judaism, that should also be their first act, is bringing a Paschal offering. And the Gemara quotes a verse to say that's not the case. But our sages say someone might also think the opposite, is that why do we bring a Korban Pesach? So we say that's a question that we ask in the Haggadah right before the end of Magid, that last section of the Haggadah of Magid, I should say, before we have the Motzi and Matzah. So we say, what's this Pesach? This Korban Pesach? Because Hashem passed over the houses of our forefathers in Egypt when he struck down the firstborns of the Egyptians. So could a convert say that? Could a convert say that God passed over the doorpost of my ancestors? His ancestors weren't there. So he said, you might think that a convert would not be able to bring the Paschal offering because he wouldn't be included in that reason. And the Torah is saying, no, a convert joins the Jewish people. He's one of us, and the ancestors of the Jewish people, which he's a part of, that happened to. So he's as eligible as anyone else to bring the Korban Pesach, the Paschal offering. Okay. So then there are divine signs for the Israelite travels in verse 15, on page 791, verse 15. On the day the tabernacle was set up, the cloud covered the tabernacle. That was a tent for the testimony. And the evening there would be upon the tabernacle like a fiery appearance until morning. So it would be the cloud would cover it, etc. And in verse 17, and whenever the cloud was lifted from atop the tent, afterwards the children of Israel would journey, and the place where the cloud would rest, there the children of Israel would encamp. According to the word of Hashem, when the children of Israel journey, and according to the word of Hashem, when they encamp, all the days that the cloud would rest upon the tabernacle, they would encamp, and whenever it got up, they would travel. And sometimes it continues that they might encamp for years, or they might encamp for a day. And they didn't even know at the time what would happen. So they were constantly in a state of flux that they may have been at rest for years at a time, but they never knew what tomorrow would bring. It could be that the cloud would rise from the tabernacle the next day and they would be off traveling again. Or it could be that they would be staying there for another year. They wouldn't know. So it was actually a difficult existence in that sense, that they were never settled because they never knew they never knew what tomorrow would bring, or even today would bring. And if you look at the translation, let's see. And if you look just at verse 15, it says, on the day the tabernacle was set up, the cloud covered the tabernacle, and in the evening there would be upon the tabernacle. It's repeating that word tabernacle a lot, not using any pronouns. And the Baal HaTurim comments that it says 7 times in this section, it says the word tabernacle in this section about their signals for traveling. So the Baal HaTurim comments that this is a hint to the 7 tabernacles that we had in our history. And that is, let's see if I could get it. I have the book open just in case I forget it. But those 7 tabernacles, the Baal HaTurim doesn't say, he just says there's 7 tabernacles. I saw Rabbi Schwab says elsewhere that would be in, let's see if I could do this, Gilgal, Shiloh, Nov, Givon. Oh, the one in the desert. I almost forgot that one. And the first temple and the second temple. So he says those 7 tabernacles that we've had, so that's symbolized by the 7 times that it says Mishkan, the tabernacle, in the section discussing the traveling. Okay. So then on page 783, verse 10, we have the trumpets. Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, make for yourself 2 silver trumpets, make them hammered out, and they shall be yours for the summoning of the assembly and to cause the camps to journey. So the commentary, 2.
For 600,000 people a year?
Yes. So that's it. Yes. So I guess it wasn't a very big, I mean, it was a pretty big camp, but it wasn't like extremely big. And trumpets, I don't know.
Okay.
I could tell you, I live pretty far from Hunt. I live probably a mile or so from Hunter, maybe more. And I could hear the cannons in the morning and the what's that?
Reveille.
Yeah.
I'll never forget when my sister was living with me down there in Hines.
Yeah.
I'd already made first lieutenant. I was in my own apartment. She lived with me for a year.
Yeah.
She said, what is that? That's what happens every morning.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So it's I hear it. The cannon, there's like the thud, and then they have the whatever. Yeah. Then the music. Yes.
Growing up Sylvan Terrace over there, I used to hear it all the time.
Oh yeah? Well, yeah, I hear it every morning.
Yeah.
Or I don't hear it anymore. I used to. I must have just gotten used to it. Yeah.
Found 68 free tanks because we would drive off post, but
Yeah.
one of the major tank trails, the armored tanks go out
Yeah.
right at the beginning of Fort Stewart. And first time that happened, it just scared the crap.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, we have those. What are those 2 propeller helicopters? The not Hueys.
The CH-47
Yeah.
Chinooks.
Yeah, the Chinooks. We have the Chinooks fly right over our house at night. They do night exercise, and the house goes like. Yeah.
That went to high school, but went to West, that actually was.
Oh, wow. Very cool. Yeah. Okay. So they would summon though that they would use trumpets. There were 2 silver trumpets to signal, and the Medrash says that it says make for yourself, not make 2 silver trumpets, but make for yourself 2 silver trumpets. And the commentary, the Medrash says that these were only for the use of Moshe, not that he would be the ones blowing it. He wouldn't like hold 1 trumpet on each side and blow it. It would be blown like we'll see by the Kohanim, but it was for Moshe's use in summoning the people, and they had signals worked out. It says, and they shall be yours for the summoning of the assembly and to cause the camps to journey. And they had different signals that had different meanings versus short blasts or long blasts or 1 blast versus 2. I'll read it. Okay. When they sound a long blast with them, this is verse 3 on page 783. When they sound a long blast with them, the entire assembly shall assemble to you to the entrance of the tent of meeting. And I guess also word would spread. Like, we heard it and then they would spread that word. And if they sound a long blast with 1, the leaders shall assemble to you the heads of Israel's thousands. So, when you sound a short blast, the camp resting to the east shall journey. When you sound short blast the second time, the camps resting to the south shall journey. Short blast shall they sound for their journeys. And when you gather together the congregation, you shall sound a long blast, but not a short blast. And the sons of Aaron, the Kohanim, shall sound the trumpets. It shall be for you an eternal decree for your generations. So I just said, what's that? Um,
The south and the east.
Remember the lessons. When they weren't there people up on the mountain that when they heard the blast, they would also.
and that I don't remember, but
Says when they sound short.
so if you look in the note on page 3 to 7, this is for Frank.
Mhm.
So there it talks about that. So it says that where is it? That the first two were the east, then the south, because that's Yehuda and Reuven. Although the passage does not mention the formation of Ephraim and Dan, the sages derive that the same procedure was followed for them. Okay, and verse 7 makes clear that
Although the
yeah,
formation on done, they derive the same.
right. It's telling you how it worked. That first you do the first one, which is the east, then the second one was the south, then it would be the west, and then it would be the north. Right, right. They would go in that order, right? So, so as to Fred, when they signaled for the new month, and the people on the mountaintops, they would have a signal, a fire signal, that they would wave, they would wave a torch to signal, and then someone on a mountain far away would see that, and they would signal, and etc. But I don't think they did that with the shofars here. Okay. And then, but it says here in verse 8, it shall be for you an eternal decree for your generations, which seems to contradict what I said before, that this was specific for Moshe and Aaron. So I saw the commentary say that, I mean, it's specific to Moshe, that the shofars of Moshe, whereas everything else that Moshe made in the desert, let's say the holy vessels that he made, the Ark of the Covenant, the table of showbread, all of those, the menorah, that they would be continued to use after Moshe passed and they went into the land of Israel. These shofars that Moshe made use of were hidden after he died. But they made new ones, and that was used for the later generations. And thus they continued doing this, that they used these trumpets, first of all, to when you wage war in your land in verse 9, against an enemy who oppresses you shall sound short blasts of the trumpets. And you shall be recalled before Hashem your God. You shall be saved from your foes. On the day of your gladness, on your festivals, and on your new moons, you shall sound the trumpets over your elevation offerings, over your feast offerings. It shall be a remembrance for you before your God. I am Hashem your God. So the Mishnah says that when, I think the Mishnah of Rosh Hashanah says that they would blow on Rosh Hashanah, they would blow the shofar, but along with the shofar, they would blow trumpets. They would blow these silver trumpets, but not at the same, it would be the shofar would go longer, so you'd have only hear the shofar sound. But they would blow trumpets along with it. And on other holidays, they would blow trumpets as well, with the shofar along with it. Okay. Okay. So now on verse 11, the bottom of page 783, it was in the second year, in the second month, on the 20th of the month, the cloud was lifted from upon the tabernacle of the testimony, and the children of Israel journeyed on their journey from the wilderness of Sinai, and the cloud rested in the wilderness of Paran. So this was a monumental moment where they actually left Mount Sinai. So they had been by Mount Sinai for a long time. They got to Mount Sinai in about the 6th month, and I'm sorry, in the 3rd month, Sivan. We received the Torah on the 6th or 7th on Sivan. It's a disagreement in the Gemara, but somewhere around there. So we received the Torah in the 3rd month, in the 1st year, and this is in the 2nd month. So this is almost a year later. So they were by Mount Sinai for almost a year, and now they're finally leaving. And it says in verse 12, the children of Israel journeyed on their journeys from the wilderness of Sinai, and the cloud rested in the wilderness of Sinai. And it discusses exactly how they did it, how they went about it, about how they did it in the order that they were commanded, with Yehuda going first, and how they took down the tabernacle and it was carried by the Levium as they were commanded, etc. Okay, then in verse 29 on page 785, Moshe said to Choviv, son of Reuel the Midianite, the father-in-law of Moshe. And this is his father-in-law Yisro. But here it calls him Choviv. I think the Ramban says that he took on the name Choviv to when he joined the Jewish people, that the custom is that when one converts, that they choose a Jewish name. And the name that he chose when he joined the Jewish people was Chovev, which means that like he held something beloved. and that he held the Torah beloved. And he tried to convince them to stay with them and bring and accompany them to the land of Israel. And Moshe said to him, "Go with us, and we shall treat you well, for Hashem has spoken good of Israel." And in verse 30, he said to him, "I shall not go, only to my land and my family I shall go." And the commentary said that he wanted to teach that now that he had learned the Torah and he had joined the Jewish people, he wanted to teach his family everything he learned as well. But Moshe, in verse 31, on page 787, Moshe said, "Please do not forsake us. Inasmuch you know our encampment in the wilderness, you have been as an eyes for us. You gave us advice. And it shall be that if you come with us, then with the goodness with which Hashem will benefit us, we will do good to you." What does that mean? What's that benefit that Hashem will benefit us, will do good to you? So the commentaries say that the land of Israel was divided up amongst the tribes, that each tribe had an allotment of land given to that tribe. Yisro, not being from the outside, being a convert, not being from one of the tribes, would not have been given a portion in the land of Israel. He would have been landless. So Moshe was telling him that if you accompany us, you will be allotted a portion as well. And the Ramban says that he did in fact go, he was convinced and he did in fact join them. And the Medrash says that the land around the city of Yericho was given to Yisro, was given to the family of Yisro. Okay.
No way.
Not yet. We're getting there. Don't worry. We'll get there. Okay. So now on page 786, verse 35. Well, I'll back up a little bit actually to verse 33. They journeyed from the mountain of Hashem a 3 days distance, and the Ark of the Covenant of Hashem journeyed before them a 3 day distance to search out for them a resting place. Okay, so the Medrash says here, I mentioned that they had been by Mount Sinai for almost a year, and now it says they journeyed from the mountain of Hashem. The Medrash says, what does that mean, they journeyed from the mountain of Hashem? The Medrash says that they ran away, when it was time to leave, they ran away like children running away from school. And what does this mean? The Medrash says that that their attitude was that we received so many mitzvahs here that if we stay longer, we might get even more. We might get more restrictions, more obligations. And it was as if they were fleeing from the mitzvahs. And they were very harshly criticized for that. Okay, and then it continued on verse 35. When the ark would journey, Moshe said, "Arise, Hashem, let your foes be scattered, and let those who hate you flee from before you." And when it rested, he would say, "Reside in tranquility, O Hashem, among the myriad thousands of Israel." This should look familiar. This is what we say when we take the Torah out of the ark and when we put it back. That Vayi ben so Aharon Vayomer Moshe Kuma Hashem. So that's the source for that. And when we put it back in the ark, we say Uvnu Chayoma. We say the second verse 36. So, and then it continues just briefly before I go back to this in chapter 11. At the bottom of the page, the people took to seeking complaints. It was evil in the ears of Hashem, and Hashem heard, and his wrath flared, and a fire of Hashem burned against them and consumed at the edges of the camp. Okay, so the commentaries asked, what's this doing here about when the ark would travel? This is what happened. If you look in the Hebrew side, you'll see that it has unusual symbols. It's like bracketed with upside down nuns. Yes, but they're upside down. And they're written in the Torah that way, that in the actual Sefer Torah, they have these upside down nuns bracketing this section. And the commentaries say that it's like that way because it doesn't really belong here. It really belongs back when we were describing how they would journey. And so why was it put over here? The commentaries say, because it's trying to separate from two different tragedies that happened, two different sorrows that happened. And it's there to kind of have like a separation between the two. And what's the first tragedy? The first tragedy is what we said. They traveled from the mountain of Hashem. And we said that they ran away like children running away from school.
They traveled from, it's the way they traveled.
Right, exactly. That
It's gone in an orderly fashion and
right.
not helter-skelter out of here.
Well, it wasn't even the helter-skelter, it was the attitude. It was the thought process when they traveled. It's like they were ready to go. Like, let's leave this place.
As opposed to, well.
As opposed to, right.
Go.
We have to, right. It's time to go because Hashem told us to go. Let's get out of here. Whereas, and then the other tragedy that's separating from is the complaints, and as we'll see, they had these big plagues as a result of the complaints. So Rabbi Shimon Schwab asked that we don't find where it says that when they journeyed from the mountain of Hashem, it doesn't say any tragedy that happens. It doesn't mention any plague or any punishment that they received. It just says they traveled from the mountain of Hashem. The Medrash says that they had the wrong attitude. Well, afterwards, with the complaints, there it talks about these plagues and consumption, the consuming from by fire that happened. They're saying, what are these two tsaras? And Rav Shimon Schwab answers that the first tzara, sometimes he says, sometimes you have a sin, you have someone does something wrong, and they're punished for it, and that's the tragedy. And he says, sometimes the tragedy is the sin itself. And he said in this case, they were by Mount Sinai. They were by the place that they heard the word of Hashem directly from God. God spoke to every single one of them. And they heard the words of Hashem. This would be the most inspiring place in the world. And they didn't feel that. Their hearts were closed to that inspiration, and they just left. And they were ready to go, and they just left. They didn't have a feeling of, I can't believe I'm leaving this place. They were ready to leave. And he said that itself is a tragedy of that. The tragedy is the fact that they didn't feel, that their hearts were closed to feeling. It's almost like that our sages say that the snake, the serpent in the Garden of Eden was cursed, that he'll eat the dust. That even though his food is always there, but his food's always available, but it's tasteless. There's no enjoyment to the food. There's no taste to the food, and that's true here. That the tragedy was that they couldn't be inspired, and they couldn't feel inspiration. Okay, so as we said in chapter 11, the people took to seeking complaints, and it was evil in the ears of Hashem. And Hashem heard, and his wrath flared, and the fire of Hashem burned against them, and they consumed at the edge of the camp. What was this complaining? So the Ramban says that the Ramban says similar. Rashi, I think, says that they were complaining about the difficulty of travel, that they had traveled for 3 days straight without a break, and it was difficult traveling, and they were complaining about the traveling. And the Ramban says they were complaining about being away from settled civilization. That like Mount Sinai was an encampment. And now they're traveling away from there, just going into the deep desert without any source of sustenance, and or just without any connection to civilization, and that was their complaint. Okay, and as we say, a fire burnt. The people cried out to Moshe. Moshe prayed to Hashem. The fire died down. He named that place Tav'era, for the fire of Hashem had burned against him. Tav'era is like boer, is to flare. Okay, and then in verse 4, the rabble that was among them cultivated a craving, and the children of Israel also wept once more and said, "Who will feed us meat? We remember the fish that we ate in Egypt free of charge, the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic, but now our life is parched. We have nothing to anticipate but the manna." And then it describes the manna and how they would make it. They would stroll, gather it, grind it in a mill, pound it in a mortar, cook it in a pot, and make it in cakes. It tasted like dough kneaded with oil. The Ramban says, what does this mean that they cultivated a craving? That means that they really had nothing to complain about. They had this manna that they were able, like it says, they were able to make these delicacies out of it. And they had nothing to complain about, but they were looking for something meaning they were looking for pleasures. It's like someone who's always looking for the next best thing, who's never satisfied you. They could have the greatest thing in the world, but they're not interested in having. They're interested in the pursuit. They want to look for something new, a new pleasure, a new craving. And they were cultivated a craving. They had everything they needed, but they wanted more. They were looking for something new to enjoy. And that's why and Hashem was, well, like we'll see that this was where Moshe, in verse 10, Moshe heard the people weeping in their family groups, each one at the entrance of his tent, and the wrath of Hashem flared greatly, and the eyes of Moshe was bad. Whereas before it didn't say that, but now in the eyes of Moshe it was bad that they had nothing to complain about, but they were still complaining. And Moses said to Hashem, and another thing I think the Ramban comments, it says, who will feed us meat? And we remember the fish that we ate in Egypt. It's not we remember the meat and fish, or who will feed us meat or fish? Who will feed us meat and we remember the fish? And so the Ramban comments that they had meat. They brought animals with them. It just wasn't a daily thing that they would eat. They weren't in really a good settled way that they could actually raise animals properly. So they couldn't be like eating meat every day. But, occasionally they would slaughter an animal and eat it. They had that available to them, but it wasn't as much as they would like. So they were saying, who would feed us meat? But with the fish, they were in the desert. They didn't have any fish. So there they would say, we remember the fish. Like it's something like in the like back of their mind, they have this distant memory of fish they used to eat in Egypt because they hadn't seen it this whole time since they crossed the sea, I guess. Okay. So in verse 11, Moshe said to Hashem, why have you done evil to your servant? Why have not found favor in your eyes? Do you place the burden of this entire people upon me? Did I conceive this entire people? Did I give birth to it? They say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries a suckling to the land that you swore to his forefathers. He's saying that I'm like raising them like a baby. On page 791, where shall I get meat to give to this entire people when they weep to me, saying, give us meat that we may eat? I alone cannot carry this entire nation, for it's too heavy for me. And if this is how you deal with me, then kill me now. If I have found favor in your eyes, and let me not see my evil. So what was Hashem's answer to Moshe? In verse 16, Hashem said to Moshe, gather to me 70 men from the elders of Israel, whom you know to be elders of the people and his officers. Take them to the tent of meeting, have them stand there with you, and I will descend and speak with you there. I'll increase some of the spirit that is upon you and place it upon them. And they shall bear the burden of the people with you, and you shall not bear it alone. So now the commentaries say that what was Moshe's problem and what was his answer? Like he asked Hashem, like, how could I get meat? If Hashem wants them to have meat, he's having he's having food rain from the sky every morning. He could give them meat from the sky every morning. What's Moshe's problem? And what's Hashem's answer? Now you have 70 men to help lead with you. You have like 70 underlings. What is that? How does that get them meat? If you couldn't get meat, meaning where's the meat coming from? How's that helping the problem? So
It's like anything.
yes, that's what I was saying, that they had it. They were just complaining. Right. Right. So the commentaries say to that, and you're kind of approaching the answer that I saw. I think it was from Shimon Schwab. I don't remember exactly where I saw this, but that the mun could taste like anything, and you could do different things like that. Like we said, you could grind it up and make it into loaves or cakes, or you could cook it, but it didn't look like the food, and it wasn't substantial like the food. Meaning, like when you eat a big meat meal, like you feel full, you feel satiated. And he said the mun didn't do that. That the commentaries say that the mun was like a purely spiritual fuel. It was like pure energy that gave them all the nutrients they needed and all the energy they needed with no waste. So like it was like a spiritual, it was like the mashal I'd give now is like an IV, that a person might survive and actually thrive with an IV that's giving them all the nutrients they need. But it's not the same as eating. You don't have that sense of that pleasure of like having a big meal and like, that was a good meal. And even though they have the taste
like whatever you wanted it to taste.
That's what the Medrash says. There might have been exceptions, but that's what the Medrash says.
And also in Beshalach, it said that the taste was like tzapichis bidvash, and here it says lashad hashemen.
Right. So maybe that was how it was baked, but the Medrash also, I think the commentaries say that that's if they wouldn't have thought about something specific, that's what it would taste like. But if they wanted it to taste like something else, the Medrash says it would taste like that. What's that?
How does lashad hashemen differ from tzapichis?
I don't know. I'd have to look into that. I don't know. Offhand. But additionally, they say about the appearance is that it might have tasted like something, but didn't look like it. And appearance is also a part of the experience of eating. That like the chefs have they plate the meal in special ways, and
First thing you eat with, it's not your taste. It's
Yes, exactly. Like Fred said, sometimes it's your nose even that you smell it coming even before you even see it. But yeah, but the first, like Fred said, the first thing you taste with is with your eyes, that you see it, and that itself, like it makes your mouth water, and that they didn't have that experience. So what is it that the Sanhedrin? So what was Moshe saying, and what's this Sanhedrin accomplishing? So I think it's Reb Shimon Schwab. I could be wrong about this, where I saw it. Who says that Moshe's problem was what Moshe was saying is that he had reached a almost purely spiritual level. That he had, when he went up Mount Sinai, he had talked. He'd been there 40 days and 40 nights, pretty much living as an angel. He didn't eat anything. He was living a purely spiritual life, and that never really left him. That he separated from his wife. He separated from his wife. He was like not really a physical being anymore. And he was saying that because of that, a leader of the people leads, and he brings sustenance to the people and brings down shefa. He brings spiritual blessing to the people based on who he is. And Moshe, being this almost purely spiritual person with almost no physicality to him, so his bracha, the bracha that he brought to the people was purely spiritual. And that was this man, which was like a purely spiritual food. It gave you nutrients, it gave you energy, but it wasn't like a physical food. And that's why he had these 70 people to lead with him, and they were not on that spiritual level as Moshe, so that they would be able to bring about this, more physical bracha, physical blessing. Okay, so but what was to happen in verse 18? And to the people who shall say, prepare yourself for tomorrow, you shall say, prepare yourself for tomorrow, and you shall eat meat, for you have wept in the ears of Hashem, saying, who will feed us meat? For it was better for us in Egypt, so Hashem will give you meat and you will eat. Not for 1 day shall you eat, nor 2 days, nor 5 days, nor 10 days, nor 20 days, until an entire month of days, until it comes out of your nose, and it shall become nauseating to you, because you have rejected Hashem as your mitzvah, you have wept before him, saying, why did we leave Egypt? Yes. And etc. And Hashem says he's going to bring it. And then on page 793, verse 24, it discusses how they got the, what's the word? The 70 elders were appointed and they had prophecies. And then on verse 30, Moshe was brought into the camp on page 793, verse 30. He and the elders of Israel, a wind went forth from before, a wind went forth from Hashem and blew quail from the sea and spread them over the camp a day's journey this way and a day's journey that way, all around the camp, 2 cubits upon the face of the earth. The people rose up all that day and then the night and on the next day and gathered up the quail. The one with the least gathered in 10 chomers. They spread them out all around the camp. The meat was still between their teeth, not yet chewed, when the wrath of Hashem flared against the people. And Hashem struck a very mighty blow against the people who had been craving, against the people. He named that place Kivros HaTaiva, the burial of the desire, because there they buried the people who had been craving. And from Kivros HaTaiva, the people journeyed to Chatzeres, they remained in Chatzeres. Okay, so the people chewed, the people were in the middle of eating already, and there was a plague that struck people down, and the people who had been complaining were struck down. But just as an aside, you see from here that quail is a kosher bird. And since we could only eat eggs from kosher birds, so quail eggs, which they sell in like Costco and other places, are kosher. But with quail, you have to be careful because there are different kinds of quail, and some of them are quail and some of them really aren't quail. They just call them quail. That there are, when the colonists or whatever they were, Puritans, came to America, so they saw birds in America that reminded them of quail, the quail that they had back in Europe, and they called those birds quail, but they're not really quail and really have no relation to quail. I think bobwhite quail is one kind, right? It's an American species. There's like Coturnix, I think it's called. Quail. I could be wrong about that word. Something like that they call Pharaoh's quail, which was in fact, many rabbis believe was this species of quail, and that species is kosher. So there are guides as to which quail are kosher, but it's something to be careful with if you're getting quail. Yes.
Oh, I see in this verse that the quail are water birds, and today's quails are
They blew from the
land.
sea. I don't know if it's from the sea or like the. Let me see how they describe that. I didn't really look at that too closely. I don't know. I'd have to add that also. I didn't look at that when I learned it, but I don't know. So in Hebrew, it's interesting. Hebrew, min hayam, yam could also mean, I mean, I don't know if it would mean this in the desert, but yam means west in Hebrew. So I'm not sure that would be so it could be from the west. I'm not sure. Art School translates it though from the sea, which implies either that it's coming from, I don't know, or else the wind's coming from the sea, but not the quail. Right. Though the sea would be on the west, right. Right. So I don't know if the wind was coming from the sea, meaning from the west, but the quail were not. I don't know. Or it means that they're coming from the direction of the sea, but I'd have to look into it. I can tell for sure. A good place to look probably would be what's it called? Rabbi Kaplan's book on the Torah. It's not Growth Through Torah. The Living Torah.
Yeah, I've got that.
I think you're right. We have some here, and I'll try to look there to see because he discusses like the kind of where science and Torah intersect. But we'll see. I'll have to look into that. Okay. So it covered, like we say, it covered, and the people ate lots of meat. So the Parsha ends on page 795. Moshe's uniqueness is challenged and affirmed. That Miriam and Aaron, in verse chapter 12, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moshe regarding the Cushite women he had married, for he had married a Cushite women. And they say, was it only to Moshe that Hashem spoke? Did he not speak to us as well? And their problem wasn't that he had married a Cushite woman. His problem was that he had separated from her. So they had heard that Moshe had separated from his wife because of his, like we said, his spiritual level, the constant prophecies he received. He always has to be available for prophecy and couldn't be in a state of ritual impurity, which living with a wife would bring about. So Moshe separated from his wife, and then Miriam had heard about it and was talking about it to Aaron, that he had separated from Zipporah, and he's not the only one who's having prophecy, so why is he separating? And Hashem said to them in verse 6, he said, hear now my words. If there shall be prophets among you in a vision, that shall I Hashem make myself known to him in a dream, shall I speak to him? That other prophets have like this, have visions, they have dreams. Not so is my servant Moshe, and my entire house is he the trusted one. Mouth to mouth do I speak to him in a clear vision and not in riddles, that the image of Hashem does he gaze. Why did you not fear to speak against my servant Moshe? That Hashem, he's saying Hashem speaks to Moshe like one person talks to another. Clear, no interpretation, no allegories, no vision. Whereas when other prophets, they had dreams of like visions that needed an interpretation. But not Moshe. Moshe's level of prophecy was completely different than anyone else's. And it says in verse 10, the cloud had departed from atop the tent. Behold, Miriam was afflicted with sara'as, like snow, this like spiritual skin disease from having spoken ill against Moshe. And in verse 13, Moshe cried to Hashem, saying, please, Hashem, heal her now. And Hashem said, let her be quarantined outside the camp for 7 days, and then she may be brought in. So the Parsha ends in verse 15. So Miriam was quarantined outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not journey until Miriam was brought in. That out of respect for Miriam, so Hashem kept the camp stationary, didn't travel for 7 days. And in verse 16, then the people journeyed from Chatzeros, and they encamped in the wilderness of Paran. That's how the Parsha ends. Okay, shkoyach. Everybody have a great Shabbos.